President Biden stated the U.S. will provide defense support to both countries while their applications are being processed. Such measures would include U.S. Navy warships steaming into the Baltic Sea, Air Force bombers flying over Scandinavia, armed Army forces training with Swedish troops, and American specialists helping to thwart against possible Russian cyber attacks. The U.S. also officially now has reopened its embassy in Kyiv. The State Department says operations are limited so far. Only a small group of about 100 employees will return for the time being. American diplomats to Ukraine currently are working from Poland, but have made day trips to Ukraine in recent weeks. At the same time, here at home, the Senate voted unanimously yesterday to confirm Bridget Brink as the new U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Brink currently is the ambassador to Slovakia and will be the first diplomat to fill the post in Ukraine since 2019, when former President Trump ordered the removal of then Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch. In just a few hours, the Senate is set to hold a final vote on a $40 billion aid package for Ukraine. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has now secured enough votes to pass the measure, already passed by the House. It then will head to President's desk for his signature. The aid package, you'll remember, delayed recently in the Senate because of an objection from Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. Joining us now, former U.S. ambassador to Russia, now director of the Institute for International Studies at Stanford and an NBC News international affairs analyst, Michael McFaul. Ambassador, it's great to have you back on the show this morning. Let's go back a couple stories to that meeting that's about to take place between the Prime Minister of Sweden, the President of Finland, and the President of the United States. An extraordinary sight when you go back 2-3 months ago to think that they would be on the doorstep, on the brink of joining NATO.
Couldn't agree more. In fact, let's go back 3 or 4 or 5 decades and remember that Putin is now achieving what Stalin did not achieve. These two countries did not join NATO in the beginning. They didn't join in several other waves. But now, because of his disastrous war and the threats that come from it for them, for their security in Ukraine, they've decided to join. Remember, he said he was invading Ukraine as a way to weaken NATO and keep Ukraine out, and he's done exactly the opposite. He's united NATO internally in a way that they haven't been for years, and now 2 more members are set to join.
Okay, so Ambassador McFaul, what's going on with Turkey? Are they leveraging this war to deal with their own issues?
I think so. I think it's very transactional. At the end of the day, I think the negotiations will move forward. The rest of the alliance seems to be very supportive of this move. I am interested where Hungary is, by the way. We haven't heard a lot from Viktor Orban, who's the one NATO ally that sometimes leans more closely to Putin. But with Turkey, I do think this is a negotiation. They're trying to get what they can while they have this leverage. I'll be shocked if at the end of the day they don't allow these 2 countries to join.
Mr. Ambassador, good morning. It's Jonathan Lemire. Certainly the White House is leaning in to getting these 2 countries in. Not only is the president meeting with them at the White House today, the White House just announced they're going to have a Rose Garden event with them afterwards. I'll be at that. So they're clearly showing a public show of support here. So assuming this does get done and Turkey eventually acquiesces, walk us through just sort of the timeline. What would this look like, and just how damaging or is this to Putin and his assessment of the West?
Well, I think it's important to point the fact out that they are having these events, that they brought the leaders to the White House. The White House wouldn't be doing that if they weren't confident that this is going to get through. So I think that's an important piece of data there. Timeline, this is fast tracking. It's rather surprising. And by the way, a little bit controversial inside Ukraine, because the Ukrainians have been seeking to join for a long time, and they keep saying you got to do this, that, and the other, incremental steps. And these 2 countries are going forward before that. And in the interim, the United States and other countries in NATO have said, while you're waiting to join, we will provide security guarantees. So I'm not sure about the exact timing. I suspect they're pushing hard now because they would like to do this at the big NATO summit in Spain next month.
So you just raised an interesting question. Such a good point. Ukraine was fighting for being a part of NATO. They really wanted that. And early on, foreign policy experts were worried about tracking Ukraine to be a part of NATO because it might actually be antagonistic toward Russia. And those discussions were definitely had. It might have even, dragged things out. And Ukraine was not qualified to join NATO at the time that this war broke out. We all know that. Does Sweden and Finland being fast-tracked into NATO open up the possibility that Ukraine could become a part of NATO? Because most experts have said Ukraine will never become a part of NATO.
It's a complicated question. I think the Ukrainians rightly believe when they hear they're not qualified, right? Like you said, and that's what they've heard for many, many years. They were supposed to sign a membership action plan, a MAP, right? That's like get into the program and get qualified, do the things you have to do to be a legitimate member. And they haven't even signed a MAP yet. At the same time, when you think, well, qualified, what does that mean?
What does that mean?
Who is providing more security to the NATO alliance right now than the Ukrainians? They're actually fighting the Russians. Nobody else is fighting directly the Russians. And so from their perspective, they say, well, we have a very competent military, and we're actually providing security to the alliance in a way that many other members are not. I think that those are, and I agree with that on a kind of normative level. On the practical level, I think membership in NATO anytime soon is unlikely, precisely because they are fighting, and nobody wants to join that fight. If Ukraine joined NATO today, that would mean that the rest of the alliance would have a greater obligation to be fighting the Russians right now. And few countries obviously want to do. In fact, no countries, I would guess, want to do that right now.
It's so interesting because, would anyone argue with the point that Ukrainians are laying down their lives and blood for the safety of the world? So kind of awkward if they're, not considered qualifiable. The leaders of Sweden and Finland are arriving at the White House right now. They are meeting with President Biden today. This all about their fast-track approval process to become members of NATO. And as we continue this conversation, we'll be watching these live pictures. This conversation, of course, incredibly important, given the fact that NATO is unified as never before, really, because of the war in Ukraine. And becoming a part of NATO is not something Sweden and Finland had in the cards for them. But the war changed everything. And so now this meeting and more meetings ahead, fast-tracking Sweden and Finland to become members of NATO. But I go back to you, Ambassador McFaulus. We have 1,000 Mariupol soldiers right now with their lives hanging in the balance in Russian territory. In moments like this happening across Ukraine, where these people have fought to the death for the world to be safer. The question is the intricacies of helping Ukraine along as they fight this war and helping them get out of this war. Will these soldiers be put in death camps in Russia, or will there be a way to get them to safety, just on a micro level?
It's a great question, and I don't know the answer to your question. I worry that they will be held. I worry, remember in Russia propaganda channels, which I watch so you don't have to, they describe these fighters in particular as being Nazi soldiers, right? Nazi criminals. And now remember, Russian soldiers have been accused of war crimes, and one's already pleaded guilty to that. And so I worry that there's going to be a trading here and a false equivalency between these Ukrainian soldiers, legitimate soldiers fighting for their own territory, and tying them to those that committed war crimes. And I think that tragically is going to be part of the trade and part of the framing that the Russians are going to pursue in the coming weeks.
Ambassador, we're looking now at a live picture just outside the White House. It's the arrival of the Prime Minister of Sweden standing with President Biden. And to go back to this topic for a moment here, if you're Vladimir Putin, you're looking at your initial aims several months ago, let's call it 3 months ago, perhaps rolling into Kyiv, taking over the capital, installing a puppet government, all these objectives to beat back countries like Finland and Sweden, to discourage them from anything. Precisely the opposite has happened. What do you suspect? It's impossible to get into his mind, but he makes of the way this has all played out over the last 3 months.
It's hard to get into his mind, that's for sure. But I think that you just ticked it off, Willie. I mean, Ukraine has won this war. Okay, when the historians write it, because of all those things you just said, he did not achieve any of those things. Remember, Putin was talking about Ukrainians as Russians with accents, and he was just going to reunite them. That failed. He was going to denazify the country. That failed. Demilitarize the country. That failed. Take the major cities, as you just pointed out, Kiev and Kharkiv. That has failed. So now he's pivoted to Donbass, and I don't want to trivialize that fight. That battle, we do not know who will win the Battle of Donbass, and it's hard to predict what will be the peace settlement, given that that it could be a stalemate for a long, long time. But on his major objectives, he's failed. And many Russians realize that, and even on Russian television, on state-controlled television, you're starting to hear little bits of that debate. What I don't know is, does Putin understand it, and what is he going to do about it? Will he respond by saying it's time to go home? That, I think, is probably unlikely. That's why I think there's going to be a long fight in Donbass.